Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turnwheel, where today we'll be taking a look at Ross, Garcia, Gilliam, and Moulder from Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. I forgot to mention this at the end of the last episode, but we are going to be doing some SSS episodes. This is, as I said in the first main episode of Sacred Stones, is a pretty small cast, so I don't think there's going to be too many, overall, especially relative to the past couple of games. But we'll see. I don't know exactly how many of these episodes. Actually, that's not true. I do know exactly how many episodes I pre-planned these out. I don't know why I said that. So let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 SSS episodes to go along with the Sacred Stones. FE8, that seems oddly fitting. Okay, yeah, so we're going to start with these guys today. I picked a real set of winners for this one, didn't I? If you've played the game, you might be a little bit disappointed that this is where we're starting, but on the other hand, consider that we're ripping the Band-Aid off of a couple of the less interesting characters in the game. I will say, as a rule, my recollection of this game is that I find most of the characters to be pretty boring. Not that this is like one of my least favorite casts in the series or anything like that. I don't dislike any of the characters particularly, at least, again, not that I can remember. But just in terms of like characters that I really like or that are outstanding or that I am really excited to talk about, there's really only like a couple. But I'm not sure if that will hold up to scrutiny. We'll see. I will say that based on what I read today, that opinion has not changed. I did not. These first 4 initial guys are not going to be changing my thoughts on the cast as a whole. I don't think, although some of them are okay. So we're going to kick things off with Gilliam, the armor knight of Frelia, who joined us this past episode rather, in chapter 1. Gilliam supports with Garcia, Franz, Cyrene, Moulder, and Naomi. And I have to say, guys, I think that Gilliam might be the single most boring character in the entire GBA era of games. He's so fucking boring in this. Holy shit. Every single one of his supports is just like him being like really stoic and serious. And there's like barely any levity to anything that he's talking about. There's like a little bit of a comedic slant to some of the stuff with Garcia where they want to like arm wrestle and like, out-muscle each other. A lot of the reason that I group these guys together is that they're very, other than Moulder, I guess, but Moulder has a couple of supports in common with a couple of these guys. Other than Moulder, they're all very, like, big, bulky dudes, like they're the bro squad, I guess you could say, along with Dazla, who is going to come in a later SSS episode. But yeah, the Gilliam Garcia support, I guess we can start there. It's just them becoming friends and being nice to each other, which is nice, I guess, but nothing really interesting or noteworthy to write home about, I don't think. The support with Franz, I actually kind of like the support. The whole idea of this support is that Gilliam teaches Franz about how, the knights and soldiers train in Frelia. Franz teaches Gilliam a little bit about how the knights and soldiers train in Renee. By the end of it, they come to the conclusion that they are, they stand to benefit from collaborating and working with each other, which is nice. I don't think, it doesn't really feel like a lesson that either of them had to learn because neither of them are particularly closed-minded people. And Frelia and Renee have been allies for a very long time, presumably, since that was where Hayden decided that Erica could go in her moment of crisis. So I'm not really sure. I don't know that this was like a lesson that either of them needed to learn, but it is a nice lesson. It is a nice little bow to put on the support, which is better than most of them, I guess. The support with Naomi is pretty much a gag support. It's kind of funny. This one I did get a good chuckle out of a couple of times. So I'll give it credit for that, but for the most part, it's like not particularly interesting at all. The Cyrene support is actually a romantic support, and I think it might be one of the most boring that we've read up to this point. They have a paired ending together. I guess they have like a history together of like knowing each other for a really long time, caring about each other. Cyrene and Gilliam have like some good back and forth where they kind of like tell each other to be careful and reminisce about their time together and just like muse about stuff. The Beast support is pretty interesting, talking about how people come to both of them for advice, which is actually something that comes up in one of Cyrene's other supports, the Moulder support. I mean, we're not going to get to Cyrene for a very, very long time. She's in the very last of the SSS episodes because she's the last character in the game to join. But we will talk a little bit about her again later this episode with Moulder, so that's something at least. I don't find Cyrene to be a very interesting character either, so... And I mean, like, that's kind of why I'm like, I'm sitting here, I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but, my thought process is like, these characters are kind of boring, and, I remember not liking the Sacred Stones cast very much, but in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe it's just these characters, right? Maybe I just picked particularly boring characters to start off with, which I think is a fine argument. But I'm like, I don't find any of their partners interesting either. For the most part, there are a couple. I like Naomi in her support with Gilliam a little bit. I like Lute in one of the supports that she has with Ross. She's pretty funny. But for the most part, these guys are just like so fucking boring. I don't know, man. The last support is Moulder for Gilliam, and I actually think that the Moulder support is kind of good. It's about Moulder like, hearing something, like hearing a noise, and Gilliam can't hear it, and Gilliam and Moulder kind of talk about how, like, maybe Moulder's losing it, or like, they reflect on their past together. It's nice. It's got some good moments. Moulder eventually remembers it as he realizes that the sound he was hearing was music, and that it was the song that they play at the coronation of the kings of Frelia, and they both of them heard it at King Hayden's coronation. And I think Moulder and Gilliam reflect back on that day, and they have some fond memories about it. And both of them just resolve to focus on the. I guess they say we must both return to the basics, which I don't really know how they got that from the conversation that they were having. I think maybe just like the idea of like remembering their past and their histories and remembering where they came from and all that, which is fine. That's a nice enough conclusion to reach, I suppose. But I like the idea. And I think it's kind of a fun concept for a support. But I don't really think it it didn't blow me away. Neither of the characters in this support were particularly interesting, even though the concept was pretty cool. I don't know. Gilliam is extremely boring, and I don't really have anything else to say about him, so I'm just gonna move on. Sorry again to Gilliam's stance. I was thinking about this earlier too, because I was like, man, I was talking shit about Gilliam in the gameplay, but if he was at least a fun or interesting character, then maybe I could say, oh, well, if you use Gilliam, if you like him, like, that's fine. And some people probably still do like him, even if it's just for his class. Some people really, really like Armor Knights. But man, he's so fucking boring. I really don't know why you would ever use Gilliam. I think I have in the past, just for fun, but I don't intend to do so anytime in the near future. I can tell you that much. All right, so next up, let's do Garcia. Garcia supports with Ross, Dazla, Seth, Naomi, and Gilliam. His support with Ross is cute, and I think it's probably one of his better supports. In general, Ross's whole deal is that he wants to live up to his father's name and eventually surpass him, and wants to be the best warrior he can be, etc., etc. And I think that Ross, Ross and Garcia interacting as Garcia trains him and teaches him about being a soldier and being a better person and all that. I think that that's just a fun dynamic that they have. Their ace support I actually really, really enjoy, because Garcia tells Ross, now that he's getting more competent and that he's starting to do a lot of fighting on his own, Garcia lets him know to be careful because he doesn't want to have to bury his own child. He doesn't want to lose his child the same way that he lost his wife and Ross lost his mother. So I think that it's a nice little interaction between them that felt poignant, even if it was a little bit on the simpler side. One of the better supports this episode, I think. The Dazla support is quite funny. I would say they're talking about they're talking about how fighting is cool and all that. But they want to branch out. They want to try different things. So they're messing around with like different, experimenting with different weapon types and things like that. At one point, they decide that they want to try to learn magic, because to them it doesn't seem that hard. It's just a lot of waving their arms around. And then at the end of the B support, they're like, yeah, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. And then in the A support, they talk about how badly it went, which is pretty funny. I think Garcia got hurt. Dazzler tried to heal him and burned his beard off, which is a fun little comedy support. I think it's much funnier than the Garcia and Gilliam one. I think that this one's a lot better. The Seth support is really boring. I really like Seth, so I was kind of hoping that he would bring this up a little bit, but he didn't really. I think that the best thing I can say about the support is that I really like the conclusion that it comes to for Garcia in the A support, which is Garcia realizing that he's a warrior at heart, and he really cares about fighting and really enjoys fighting to protect the people he cares about, but that he also is a father, and he doesn't regret his decision to retire from the army to take after, to look after his son. It's the aspect of himself that he gave up on that day is something that he missed, and that he doesn't want to give up on either. But he also understands that he made the right call as a father. So he wants to embrace both aspects of his life, being a father and being a warrior, which I think is a really nuanced perspective compared to what we got from him previously in the story. In the story, his whole recruitment conversation was that he was kind of being portrayed as like, maybe not like a coward. Like, I don't think anyone was being like too hard on him, but the conclusion that you were supposed to come to for Garcia in that moment was definitely that like him passing up the opportunity to fight for Renee in order to raise Ross, or at least if he were to continue to decide to do that would be wrong. Ross kind of snapped him out of it. Ross is, grown up now, or relatively speaking, he's like a teenager, and he doesn't want his dad to hold back on his account. And I think that this is a nice way of like reframing that, like, yeah, like maybe that he shouldn't have given up fighting completely either, but he also made the right decision by trying to be a father for his son. And I think that's a nice nuanced perspective for that plot line. It's also the most nuanced that plot line gets at all. And the rest of the support's really boring. So that's really all I have to say about that. The Namie support gives us a lot of backstory on Namie's grandfather. And I think it's nice because, I can talk more about it as a support for Namie, I guess. But I like Garcia in a couple of his supports. I actually wish that he did this more, because he does it with Ross as well, and I think it works really well in that support as well. Garcia taking on more of a mentor figure, taking on the role of more of a mentor figure. I think it works really well. I think that he fits the role really naturally. And he gives a lot of good advice to Namie about being a fighter, being a warrior, living up to her grandfather's name and all that. And Namie helps him to be to reflect a little bit more on like himself as a person. And their dynamic is pretty fun. So I thought it was a pretty good support overall, even if it was a little bit on the boring side. This is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Where like most of these supports are like, they're nice, but I don't really have anything like deep. I don't have anything that I can like reach in and pull out of most of these supports. I think the Seth and Garcia one was the most interesting one so far from that perspective. But it's most of these are just kind of like pleasant, but not all that interesting. Okay, let's do Moulder next. I like Moulder and Ross a fair bit more than the previous two, although still not phenomenal. But I think we'll do Moulder next. Moulder supports only 5 support partners on Moulder. I don't remember how many characters have that. What's it called? Like, have only 4 support partners as opposed to 5 or more. But Moulder only has 4. His 4 are Vanessa, Colm, Gilliam, and Cyrene. Oh, I skipped over the Gilliam Garcia support, but I didn't really have anything else to say about it. I thought it was pretty bad. I don't think it really, like, anything about it from Garcia's perspective changes anything, so, whatever. Moulder's Vanessa support is kind of nice. the main thrust of it is that Vanessa clearly has a crush on Prince Inez of Frelia, who's a character that we're going to meet more later on. And Moulder is like telling her stories about Vanessa. I kind of like this, if for no other reason than it's nice to get to know a little bit about Inez before we actually meet him in the story, assuming that you get the Moulder and Vanessa support. The actual story that he tells about Inez is like really funny too, because he's just like a cocky prick from the moment he's like 6 years old or whatever. And he can like he's super skilled with a bow, was able to best the world famous archer in an archery contest, and is just like a huge dick about it. It's very funny. Inez, I remember Inez being a character that I enjoyed, if for no other reason than he was just like a smug dickhead, which is pretty fun. It's a pretty funny character dynamic. Either that, or either the story is completely real, in which case that's funny in its own right, or Moulder is playing the ultimate wingman because, no pun intended, because Vanessa, by the end of the story was like, damn, I want to marry him even more now, and that's awesome. So respect on Moulder if that's what he was going for, or respect on Inez if he was just like the coolest, most awesome guy ever in the whole world, at age 6 or whatever. They don't actually give his name. He said it was over 10 years ago, and that the prince was a child. I don't know how old Inez is. He's probably like 18 to 20 range, probably about the same age as Erica, and Ephraim, but he could be older, I guess. I don't know. The Gilliam support, again, I enjoy the concept, but I think both Moulder and Gilliam are pretty boring in it for the most part, so I'm not going to spend any additional time on that. Moulder's Cyrene support is kind of nice. Cyrene just seems to be very nice, and like a very pleasant person. She treats Moulder very well. They talk a little bit about how the women in the army feel a little bit more comfortable going to Cyrene over Moulder. And Moulder is, like, oh, that makes sense. I don't want to talk too much about Cyrene. I know this is Moulder's support. And I think that this support does do a little bit to help characterize Moulder. Basically, by the end of it, Cyrene is reminding him about his birthday. And Moulder, takes a minute to be like, damn, I really would have just like completely forgotten about my own birthday. Which is, it's just fun. It's like it's a good moment of reflection for him, I think, to care a little bit more deeply about himself. I think Cyrene kind of brings this out of a lot of people. I'm curious to see. I guess we're going to be seeing all of her other supports before we actually get to Moulder's, or before we get to her SSS episode. So I guess we'll see more of it from support partners like Vanessa, who is her sister. But for the most part, it's I think that she just kind of brings this sort of. I think that she's just a very caring person and brings a sort of gentle energy to a lot of her supports that I think makes other people appreciate her presence. That's the best I got. As far as Moulder goes, I just think it's a nice moment for him to reflect on how hard he's pushing himself and like resolving to take better care of himself. Okay, and Colm is the final support. I like this one. I don't really like it that much for Colm because it feels like they're trying to go somewhere with it, but it ends up just falling very flat, in my opinion. For Colm, for Moulder, I think it's funny. I think it's fun for Moulder to just be like the old like strict dad, kind of trying to teach Colm a lesson about like responsibility and remorse and all that. And I think that's a fun dynamic for these two to have, even though I don't think Colm really like. I don't think they take it in the direction that would be most interesting for Colm. I like putting Moulder in this role compared to a lot of his other roles, where he's a lot more like on the same level as the other person, or a lot more caring. Moulder, with Colm, he's very like strict and stern, which is fun. It's a new side of Moulder that we don't get to see in any of his other supports. Okay, and finally we have Ross. I think this might end up being the shortest SSS episode yet, because we're only at 20 minutes, and I think I can get through the most of these supports in a pretty short amount of time. So Ross supports with Garcia, Lute, Amelia, Ewan, and Garrick. We already talked about his Garcia support. I don't have much to add there. I think Ross, wanting to prove himself and being very ambitious is good. But I also think that like they could have very easily made him like a dickhead. They could have made him very egotistical or like wanting to prove himself to the detriment of like the other people in the army or to his own safety. And they don't really go that direction. He is very receptive to what his father has to say. He cares a lot about his father. He clearly values his father's opinion and wants to do right by him, which I think is a nice dynamic. I enjoy their conversation a fair bit. The Loot conversation is really, really funny for Loot. I remember Loot being like one of the better characters in the game. I do think like here's the problem with Loot, right? Is that I remember all of her supports being like this, which is like fine. It's a fun quirk for her to just be really like full of herself. But I remember it being like getting a little bit tiresome by having read all of her supports. But we'll see if that holds up. We're actually doing Loot in the next SSS episode anyway, so we'll see how I feel about her after that. But the Ross end of this conversation, he's still funny. He plays the straight man here a little bit. She's very smart, but very like socially awkward. Whereas he's like, very dumb. He's like dumb as a sack of rocks, but he's a lot more enthusiastic and a lot more personable. So it just makes sense to put them together. I think that they both have a fun dynamic in that sense. The Amelia support provides him with a paired ending. I don't think Moulder had any paired endings, and neither did Garcia. Well, Garcia and Ross have a paired ending, where they just talk about how they remained like very, had a strong familial bond for the rest of their lives. But Ross's only other paired ending is with Amelia. And I don't know, this one I wasn't really like sold on this one. I think that they're kind of cute together. Amelia says Zowie right at the beginning of the support, which is she's the best character in the game for that reason alone. But I don't know. I just feel like the dynamic doesn't really land as well for me as it does with Loot. I actually think that Loot would have been. I think the Loot would have been a good paired ending because I think both of them bring a lot of good qualities out of each other. And by the end of it, they both grown and changed a little bit. Whereas with Amelia, I feel like Ross is trying to get her to be like a little bit more confident, or it's just not. I do think it shows that Ross is like cares a lot about the people in his life. I think he do this with Ewan as well. He has a habit with a couple of his support partners, the other two trainees, as a matter of fact, where he says like, why don't you just think of me as your brother? And I think that's like, it's very obviously Ross's attempt to connect and relate to people, especially since, his whole thing is that he cares so much about his dad. We don't really know about the other people in his life prior to his village being destroyed, but he cares so much about his dad. And I think part of this mindset is that like he doesn't really know how to connect with people that he wants to connect with on a deeper level other than comparing it to family. Ross is also an only child, so I think maybe there's a little bit of I want to have like a sibling to take care of. I think it says a little bit about Ross that's where his mind goes, and that's interesting. That's fun. But I don't know. I don't think that the Amelia and Ross dynamic really develops into. I don't see them together romantically. I just don't. It just doesn't feel smooth to me. But that's it is what it is. He does get Amelia to open up and come out of her shell a little bit more, which is nice. The Ewan support is really funny. It's actually pretty similar to the Loot support, which I don't know why he supports so many smug mages, but apparently he supports two of them. Ewan isn't like smug in the same way that Loot is. Loot is just very full of herself. Ewan seems to be just more like messing with him on purpose, which is funny. Whereas Loot, it seems more like a byproduct of just her thinking that she's better than everybody else. Ewan is just kind of like teasing him, which is enjoyable to see. He gives Ross like a brain teaser, and Ross gets the brain teaser wrong a couple of times before Ewan like breaks it down step by step, and Ross doesn't like fully understand exactly what's going on, but his dedication to solving it is like really fun to see. He's like, no, don't, I'll figure it out. You wait. And that's like the gap between the C and B supports is him thinking about it and trying to figure it out. Ross says, I see. Hey, I just had a great idea. Let's be brothers. And Ewan says, huh? Like blood brothers? I'm not really into slicing myself up for people I just met. Which is very funny. I don't know why he talks like this. He's got a very fun he's just got a very fun personality. But I'm spending so much time talking about the other characters in these supports because the actual characters that I'm supposed to be talking about just aren't that interesting. But Ross is okay here. I think it's a fine support for him. The Garrick support is pretty forgettable. Garrick, he and Ross talk about Garcia. They talk a little bit about the weapon triangle. Why are swords strong against axes? I want to be able to beat any sword with just an iron axe or whatever. Which is a pretty fun I guess nod to some of the more gamified mechanics. Um, but other than that, it's just Garrick. Did I say Garrick? Did I say Garcia earlier? I made the same mistake in the main episode that I just put out, calling Garrick Garcia by accident. But no, this support is with Garrick. Um, it's just kind of Garrick taking on a mentor role for Ross, and trying to educate him a little bit on fighting. And by the end of it, Garrick says that he thinks Ross is going to surpass his father, which is nice to see. It's a little tying it into Ross's whole like character and theme. I don't remember Garrick like basically at all, so I don't know if this is one of his better supports or one of his worst supports, but I think it's okay. I think it's fine. Okay, yeah. Less than 30 minutes. Probably closer to 25 minutes by the time that this is all over. I didn't really have a lot to say about these guys, but I wanted to make sure that I gave everybody a fair shake. Ross and Moulder are both okay. I think Ross is probably my favorite character this episode, but it's not really saying very much. I don't care for any of them beyond just like, yeah, they're okay, I guess. Ross maybe leaning more towards like, yeah, he's fine, he's nice. Um, but yeah, that's it. That's it for me today. Enjoy the short little episode. I'm very excited. Maybe I rushed through it a little bit because I'm very excited to actually continue playing FE8. I want to keep going and do some of those chapters. And I wanted to make sure I got this out or at least recorded before I actually started playing more chapters for FE8. Next SSS episode is going to be covering Namie, Colm, Archer, and Loot. So once we get those guys, we got Namie and Colm already, but once we get Archer and Loot in the main story, we'll be doing an SSS for them as well. So yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.